May 10, 1940, New York City. Theodor Geisel sat at his drawing board working on his fourth children's book. Horton Hatches the Egg told the story of an elephant who sits on a bird's nest. It was whimsical, innocent, fun. Geisel had found modest success with his previous books. And to think that I saw it on Mulberry Street, the 500 hats of Bartholomew Cubbins, the King's stilts. His style was distinctive, impossible creatures, rhyming verse, bright colours, simple moral lessons. He was building a reputation as a children's author. The critics liked him. Parents bought his books. Children loved his characters. Then the radio interrupted. A news flash. Paris has fallen to the Nazis. Geisel put down his pen. The elephant hatching an egg could wait. Something had changed. The world was burning. And he couldn't draw whimsical creatures anymore. Not when fascism was spreading across Europe. Not when democracy was under threat. Not when America was pretending it could stay out of the war. Theodor Geisel would return to children's books eventually. But first, he had a different kind of story to tell. And the innocent drawing style that had charmed children would become something else entirely. A weapon. The man nobody expected, Theodor Seuss Geisel, was born March 2, 1904, in Springfield, Massachusetts. His family was German-American. His father managed the city's public park system after Prohibition closed the family brewery. His grandfather was a successful brewer who had immigrated from Germany. Growing up, young Ted Geisel faced anti-German sentiment. World War I made German Americans suspect. Neighbors questioned their loyalty. Children faced bullying. The experience shaped him profoundly. He understood what it meant to be the other. He knew how easily communities could turn against outsiders. He learned that prejudice could poison even close-knit neighborhoods. These early experiences would later inform his work, both the cartoons and the books, but in ways nobody predicted. At Dartmouth College, Geisel wrote for the Humour magazine. He was the editor until he was caught drinking bootleg gin. This was Prohibition, after all. The college banned him from the magazine. To continue contributing, he needed an alias. He chose his middle name, Seuss. Later, he added Doctor, though he never earned a doctorate. After college, he went to Oxford, intending to become a literature professor. Instead, he spent his time travelling and doodling. There he met Helen Palmer, who would become his first wife. She convinced him to pursue art instead of academia. Back in New York, Geisel worked as an illustrator and advertiser. His cartoons appeared in Judge and the Saturday Evening Post. One cartoon featured Flit insecticide. Standard Oil noticed and hired him to create advertisements. For years, Geisel made a comfortable living drawing advertising cartoons. His style developed: exaggerated features, impossible creatures, humour. The same style that would later define Dr. Seuss. By 1940, he had published 4 children's books. They were moderately successful. But his real income came from advertising. Then Paris fell. And everything changed. The newspaper nobody reads. PM Magazine was unusual. Founded in 1940 by Ralph Ingersoll, with backing from Marshall Field III, it had an unconventional business model. No advertising. It relied entirely on circulation revenue. This freed it from advertiser influence. It could take controversial positions. PM was left-leaning, pro-New Deal, anti-fascist, interventionist. Most newspapers in 1940 supported isolationism. They argued America should stay out of Europe's war. They emphasized the Atlantic Ocean as protection. They questioned why American boys should die for European problems. PM took the opposite view. It saw Hitler as a threat to democracy everywhere. It believed fascism must be stopped before it spread further. It argued America couldn't hide behind oceans, but PM needed compelling content to sell this message. Traditional news reporting wasn't enough. Americans were tired of war talk. They needed something different, something visual, something memorable, something that would make them feel the threat viscerally. They needed political cartoons. One evening in Manhattan, Geisel showed a friend, Zinnie Vanderlip Scholars, an editorial cartoon he'd drawn. Zinnie worked at PM. She showed Geisel's cartoon to her boss, Ralph Ingersoll. PM published it on January 30th, 1941. Geisel became PM's chief editorial cartoonist. Over the next 2 years, he would draw more than 400 cartoons. The man who created whimsical elephants and imaginative worlds was about to create something very different: weapons made of ink. The drawings nobody expected, Geisel's PM cartoons, shocked people who knew his children's books. The style was recognizably Seussian, the same flowing lines, the same exaggerated features, the same impossible creatures. But the content was darker, angrier, more pointed. His first target, isolationists. Charles Lindbergh, the famous aviator, led the America First Committee. They campaigned against US involvement in the war. Lindbergh gave speeches warning against European entanglements. He suggested America could coexist with Nazi Germany. Geisel savaged him. One cartoon showed Lindbergh patting a sea serpent covered in swastikas. The serpent wore Hitler's moustache. Caption: "Adolf, wipe your feet on our doormat and come right in." Another showed an ostrich with its head in the sand, replacing the eagle on currency. Caption: "The Lindbergh Quarter." The cartoons used Geisel's innocent style for devastating effect. The creatures looked like they belonged in children's books, but they delivered brutal political commentary. This juxtaposition made them powerful. The whimsy made the message digestible. The innocence made the horror more shocking. When Paris fell to Nazis, Geisel drew a Seussian bird being blasted into the sky. Label: "Isolationism." Caption: "He never knew what hit him." The innocent bird dying violently captured the moment perfectly. Isolationism wasn't just wrong, it was dead. The enemy nobody saw, December 7, 1941, Pearl Harbor. Geisel's mission shifted, no longer fighting domestic isolationists, now mobilizing the nation for war. His cartoons promoted war bonds. They encouraged scrap collection. They attacked war profiteers. They exposed anti-Semitism. They fought against racism. And they portrayed the enemy. Here, Geisel's work becomes complicated. His depictions of Germans showed variety. He drew Hitler as a maniacal dictator. He drew Nazi leaders as distinct individuals. He portrayed some Germans sympathetically, victims of Hitler rather than perpetrators. But his depictions of Japanese were different, problematically different, disturbingly different. Geisel drew Japanese people as interchangeable. Same face. Every Japanese character looked identical. Coke bottle glasses, slanted eyes, piggish nose, bushy mustache, toothy smile. Not Tojo, not the emperor, not any individual. Just Japanese. One cartoon showed a single face on 5 Japanese bodies. The message: they're all the same. They're not individuals. They're an undifferentiated threat. Another showed Japanese as alley cats, sneaking, smiling, preparing for sneak attacks. The racism was explicit. It was typical of the era. But it was still racism, and it had consequences. The injustice nobody stopped Executive Order 9266, February 19, 1942. Roosevelt authorized military commanders to designate exclusion zones. Over 120,000 Japanese Americans, most of them US citizens, were forcibly removed from their homes. They were sent to internment camps. Their property was confiscated. Their rights were violated. Their loyalty was questioned based solely on ancestry. Propaganda enabled this. Posters and cartoons depicting Japanese as subhuman, treacherous and foreign-made internment seem reasonable. Geisel contributed to this atmosphere, not intentionally, not maliciously. But his cartoons reinforced stereotypes that justified injustice. He drew a cartoon showing a line of identically smiling Japanese Americans on the West Coast. They held packages labeled TNT. They waited for orders from Tokyo. The implication: Japanese Americans were a fifth column waiting to sabotage America. This wasn't true. No Japanese American was ever convicted of espionage or sabotage during World War II. The internment was driven by racism and war hysteria, not actual threats. But cartoons like Geisel's helped convince Americans that internment was necessary. Later in life, Geisel deeply regretted these cartoons. In 1954, he wrote "Horton Hears a Who" as an allegory about the American occupation of Japan. The dedication read, "For my great friend, Mitsugi Nakamura of Kyoto, Japan." The book's message, "A person's a person, no matter how small," was his attempt at atonement, recognition that he had once failed to see Japanese people as fully human. But in 1942, he was convinced he was fighting evil, and his innocent drawing style made the dehumanization more palatable. The message nobody questioned. Geisel's other wartime cartoons attacked legitimate targets. He drew war profiteers as vultures. He showed industrialists sabotaging the war effort for profit. He depicted labor union leaders causing unnecessary strikes. He attacked congressional opponents of the New Deal. One cartoon showed a bloated industrialist sitting on supplies marked "For Victory." He's feeding himself while soldiers starve. Caption: "Cages cost money." Another showed anti-Semites as literal rats spreading disease. This was particularly brave, given the prevalence of anti-Semitism in 1940s America. Geisel consistently attacked prejudice against Jews and black Americans. He drew cartoons showing lynching as un-American. He depicted segregation as helping Hitler. He portrayed anti-Semitism as Nazi ideology. These positions were controversial in 1940s America. Many northern newspapers tolerated or ignored Southern racism. Many publications downplayed Nazi persecution of Jews. Many Americans held anti-Semitic views. Geisel's cartoons challenged these attitudes. He used his innocent drawing style to make uncomfortable truths visible. One cartoon showed Uncle Sam planting seeds. The seeds were labeled with ethnic groups: Irish, Jewish, Italian, black, etc. They grew into fighters. Caption: "Melting pot." The message: America's diversity was its strength. Another showed Hitler looking at American unity in shock. Different races and ethnicities working together. Hitler's ideology said this was impossible. Geisel's cartoon said it was America's advantage. The style nobody could ignore. Why were Geisel's cartoons so effective? The innocent style? Political cartoons traditionally used realistic drawing, detailed faces, accurate uniforms, recognizable locations. Geisel used none of that. His world was impossible. His creatures were fantastical. His proportions were absurd. This made his cartoons more powerful, not less. First, accessibility. His cartoons didn't require sophisticated knowledge of current events. You didn't need to recognize specific politicians. The symbols were simple. The messages were clear. An ostrich with its head in the sand meant willful ignorance. A vulture meant profiteering. A rat meant treachery. Children could understand these images. So could adults with limited education or English skills. Second, memorability. Realistic political cartoons blurred together. Geisels stood out. You remembered the Seussian creatures. You couldn't forget that sea serpent with Hitler's moustache. Third, emotional impact. Realistic drawings of suffering created distance. Too realistic, and readers looked away. Geisel's style created intimacy. His creatures looked friendly, until they weren't. This made the horror more shocking. A realistic drawing of Nazi violence was expected. A Seussian creature committing that same violence was disturbing. The innocence violated made the message penetrate deeper. Fourth, moral clarity. In the real world, war is complex. Good and evil blur. Motivations are mixed. Outcomes are uncertain. In Geisel's cartoons, moral lines were clear. Hitler was evil, democracy was good, fascism must be destroyed, America must fight. This simplification wasn't naive, it was strategic. War requires moral clarity. Soldiers can't fight effectively if they question whether their cause is just. Citizens can't sacrifice if they doubt whether it matters. Geisel's innocent style delivered moral certainty. The cartoons. Nobody forgets. Some of Geisel's wartime cartoons became particularly famous, or infamous. The war bond campaigns Geisel created a series promoting war bonds. These appeared not just in PM but in hundreds of newspapers nationwide. One showed a ragged soldier in combat. Behind him, a comfortable civilian reading a newspaper. Caption: "Boss, maybe you'd better hock me and buy more US defense bonds and stamps." The contrast was devastating. The soldier fighting, the civilian relaxing. The implication: your comfort is built on their sacrifice. The Seussian style made it work. The exaggerated proportions emphasized the gap between soldier and civilian. The impossible angle, soldier somehow addressing civilian across space and time, created intimacy. You couldn't escape that soldier's gaze. Another war bond cartoon showed Uncle Sam as a boxer. He's training for a fight. Every punch bag is labelled with something citizens could do. Buy bonds, save scrap, plant victory gardens. The message: citizens fight too, just differently. Your bond purchase is a punch against Hitler. Geisel understood the psychology perfectly. Americans wanted to contribute. They felt helpless while soldiers fought overseas. War bonds gave them tangible action. His cartoons amplified this feeling. They made bond purchases feel heroic. The scrap collection campaigns, America needed metal. Tanks required steel, planes required aluminum, ships required everything. The government organized scrap drives. Citizens collected old pots, pans, car parts, appliances. Geisel drew cartoons promoting collection. One showed Hitler as a giant. Americans bring him scrap metal. But instead of giving it to Hitler, they melt it down and shoot it back at him. Your old car becomes artillery shells. Another showed a family looking at their junk pile. The pile transforms into a tank. Caption: "You too can sink U-boats." The impossible transformation visualized what was actually happening. Scrap was being turned into weapons. Geisel's style made the transformation literal instead of abstract. The anti-Semitism campaigns. Perhaps Geisel's bravest cartoons attacked American anti-Semitism. This wasn't safe. Anti-Semitism was widespread in 1940s America. Major newspapers published anti-Semitic content. Respected public figures made anti-Semitic statements. Many Americans held anti-Semitic views. But PM was uncompromising, and so was Geisel. He drew anti-Semites as literal rats spreading disease. He showed them wearing swastikas. The message: American anti-Semitism helped Hitler. One cartoon showed Hitler reading with delight about American racial violence. Caption: "Keep those lynchings going. They're helping our side." Geisel argued that American racism undermined the moral authority to fight Nazis. How could America claim to oppose Hitler's racial ideology while tolerating lynching and discrimination? This was radical for 1942. Many Americans saw no connection between domestic racism and fighting Germany. Geisel forced that connection. Another cartoon showed the Statue of Liberty next to a "whites only" sign. Hitler points and laughs. How can America promote freedom while denying it to black citizens? These cartoons made many readers uncomfortable. Good. That was the point. The production campaigns. American factories needed to run at maximum capacity. Worker productivity was crucial. Labor strikes threatened war production. Geisel drew cartoons attacking strike leaders, not workers, not unions. But leaders he saw as sabotaging the war effort. One showed a strike leader as a vulture. He sits on a pile of idle machines. Soldiers die in the background. Caption: "Cages cost money." Another showed Hitler and Hirohito celebrating an American strike. Those Americans sure can attack themselves. The message: strikes help the enemy. Worker grievances might be legitimate, but timing matters. Win the war first. These cartoons were controversial. Labor unions protested. They argued workers had legitimate complaints: low wages, unsafe conditions, discrimination. Geisel wasn't entirely wrong. Some strikes were genuinely harmful to war production. But he oversimplified. Workers weren't sabotaging America. They were fighting for basic rights. His innocent style made complex labor disputes seem simple. Good workers versus bad strike leaders. This was effective propaganda, but poor analysis. The isolationist campaigns before Pearl Harbor, Geisel's primary target was isolationists, Americans who wanted to stay out of the war. Charles Lindbergh became his favorite target. The famous aviator led the America First Committee. They argued that Hitler wasn't America's problem. Europe should solve European wars. Geisel saw this as moral cowardice. Worse, he saw it as helping Hitler. He drew Lindbergh as an ostrich, head buried in sand, unwilling to see the approaching threat. He drew Lindbergh patting Hitler's head, appeasing the serpent, pretending it wasn't dangerous. He drew America First Committee members sleeping, Hitler creeping closer. They refused to wake up. These cartoons were brutal. They questioned Lindbergh's patriotism. They suggested isolationists were Nazi sympathizers. This wasn't entirely fair. Many isolationists genuinely believed America should focus on domestic problems. They remembered World War I's devastation. They didn't want to repeat it. But Geisel believed, correctly, history shows, that Hitler represented an existential threat. Isolationism would allow Nazi conquest of Europe. Eventually, America would face Hitler alone. His cartoons made this case viscerally. The ostrich gets eaten, the sleeping family gets attacked, the serpent grows larger. Isolation doesn't protect you, it just delays the inevitable fight while your enemies grow stronger. After Pearl Harbor, Geisel drew his famous bird cartoon, the isolationist bird being blasted into the sky. He never knew what hit him. Isolationism was dead. Geisel's cartoons helped kill it. The technique that never changed across hundreds of cartoons, Geisel used consistent techniques. Personification, abstract concepts became characters. Isolationism was a bird. War production was Uncle Sam's boxing training. Anti-Semitism was rats. The war effort was various machines and creatures. This made abstract ideas concrete. You can't visualize national unity, but you can visualize Americans of different backgrounds working together. Exaggeration. Geisel's style relied on extreme exaggeration. Impossible proportions. Absurd scenarios, fantastic creatures. This served multiple purposes. It made cartoons memorable. It emphasized key points. It made serious subjects digestible. Repetition Geisel returned to certain images repeatedly. Uncle Sam appeared in dozens of cartoons. Hitler appeared in hundreds. The ostrich in sand became his symbol for willful ignorance. This repetition created a visual vocabulary. Regular PM readers learned the symbols. They could decode messages quickly. Moral clarity. Every Geisel cartoon had clear good and bad sides. No ambiguity, no nuance, no complex analysis. This was deliberate. Propaganda requires certainty. Doubt undermines action. If you're unsure whether the cause is just, you won't sacrifice for it. Geisel's innocent style delivered that certainty. The good characters looked sympathetic. The bad characters looked monstrous. The right choice was obvious. Emotional manipulation. Geisel's cartoons targeted emotion, not reason. They made you feel anger at Hitler. They made you feel pride in America. They made you feel guilt about not doing enough. They made you feel fear about the enemy. The innocent style enhanced this. When cute Seussian creatures were threatened, you felt protective. When they fought back, you felt triumphant. This emotional engagement bypassed critical thinking. You didn't analyze whether the cartoon's argument was sound. You felt what it wanted you to feel. That's propaganda's power, and its danger. The impact nobody measured. How much did Geisel's cartoons actually matter? Impossible to quantify precisely. You can't measure a cartoon's contribution to victory, but we know they were widely seen. PM had circulation around 160,000 in 1942, not huge for a New York daily, but influential readers, intellectuals, policymakers, journalists. More importantly, Geisel's war bond cartoons were syndicated. They appeared in hundreds of newspapers nationwide. Millions of Americans saw them. We know war bond sales increased dramatically. Americans purchased $185 billion in war bonds during the war. Geisel's cartoons contributed to that. How much? Unknown, but they contributed. We know scrap collections succeeded. Americans donated millions of tons of metal, rubber, paper. Geisel's cartoons helped motivate that. We know isolationist sentiment collapsed after Pearl Harbor. Geisel's pre-war cartoons had prepared ground for that shift. We know Geisel's work was valued. The military commissioned him, promoted him, gave him significant responsibilities, awarded him the Legion of Merit. They wouldn't have done this if his work was ineffective. The darkness. Nobody acknowledges, but Geisel's cartoons also caused harm. The Japanese caricatures contributed to the atmosphere enabling internment. This wasn't his sole fault. Hundreds of artists created similar images. The government actively promoted anti-Japanese propaganda. Racism against Asian Americans long predated the war. But Geisel participated. His cartoons were part of that propaganda campaign. His innocent style made the dehumanization more palatable. When a children's book author draws Japanese people as identical subhuman creatures, it carries weight. The same pen that created friendly elephants created enemy monsters. This juxtaposition was powerful and destructive. Geisel also oversimplified complex issues. Labor disputes weren't just greedy strike leaders. They involved legitimate worker grievances. Isolationists weren't all Nazi sympathizers. Many had reasonable concerns about foreign entanglements. War wasn't as morally simple as his cartoons suggested. The Allies committed atrocities too. American racism undermined claims of moral superiority. Victory required compromises with questionable allies like Stalin. Geisel's cartoons erased this complexity. They had to. That's how propaganda works. But the cost was truth. The soldier nobody expected, Private Snafu, was Geisel's masterpiece of military propaganda and his most subversive creation. The character's name said it all: situation normal, all fouled up. Actually, the acronym was cruder, but military audiences knew what it really meant. Snafu was incompetent, lazy, careless, stupid. Every episode showed him doing something wrong and suffering consequences. In one episode, he talks carelessly in a bar. An attractive woman listens carefully. She turns out to be an enemy spy. Snafu's loose lips sink ships, literally. The episodes were darkly funny, animated by Warner Brothers' best talents. They brought the same energy they used on Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck. But the content was subversive. Snafu got drunk, chased women, ignored orders, fell for booby traps, both explosive and female. This was shown to military audiences in 1943. Soldiers loved Private Snafu. The cartoons were funny, memorable, and effective. More importantly, they worked better than traditional training. Dry lectures about malaria prevention put soldiers to sleep. Watching animated mosquitoes made them remember to use mosquito netting. This was Geisel's genius. Propaganda works best when it entertains, when it makes people laugh, when it doesn't feel like propaganda. The transformation that mattered, January 7, 1943. Geisel reported for duty at the US Army. He was commissioned as a captain. He left behind PM magazine and editorial cartoons. He joined the Information and Education Division. His mission: create propaganda to train soldiers and maintain morale. He created Private Snafu. Situation normal, all fouled up. Though the original acronym was less polite, Private Snafu was an animated cartoon character who taught by negative example. He did everything wrong. He talked carelessly and revealed secrets to enemy spies. He ignored safety precautions and got malaria. He mishandled equipment and caused disasters. He fell for booby traps, including buxom spies. The cartoons were remarkably risque for the era. Since they were shown only to military audiences, they weren't subject to Hollywood censorship. They featured mild profanity, sexual innuendo, and crude humor. One episode showed a mosquito named Malaria Mike targeting Private Snafu's bare bottom as he bathed. Soldiers loved them. The cartoons were funny, memorable, and effective. Training films that entertained kept soldiers' attention better than dry lectures. Geisel wrote rhyming scripts. He contributed to storyboards. He worked with top animators including Chuck Jones, Friz Frayling, and Frank Tashlin, the masters behind Looney Tunes. The Private Snafu cartoons used the same principle as his PM cartoons: innocent style delivering serious messages. After his promotion to major in 1944, Geisel shifted to live-action propaganda. He wrote Your Job in Germany, a film for soldiers about the occupation. The film carried an ominous warning: Germans couldn't be trusted. The Nazi Party was defeated, but Nazi ideology persisted. American soldiers must remain vigilant. The film was narrated by John Huston and seen by millions of soldiers. Geisel also worked on Design for Death, a documentary about Japanese culture. The film attempted to explain why Japan embraced militarism. It won the Academy Award for Best Documentary in 1948. By war's end, Geisel had received the Legion of Merit. Citation: exceptionally meritorious service in planning and producing films, particularly those utilizing animated cartoons for training, informing, and enhancing the morale of the troops. His innocent drawing style had become an official weapon of war. The Return Nobody Wanted, 1945, War's End. Geisel returned to civilian life. But returning to children's books wasn't simple. He'd spent 4 years creating propaganda. Drawing cute creatures seemed trivial after what he'd witnessed. Many war artists struggled with this transition. They documented combat, suffering, death. How do you return to normal art after that? Geisel had a different problem. He'd been enormously successful at propaganda. His cartoons had mobilized millions. His films had trained soldiers. His work had contributed to victory. But at what cost? The Japanese-American internment haunted him. His cartoons had contributed to the hysteria that enabled it. He'd portrayed an entire ethnic group as subhuman threats. This recognition created a crisis. Were his drawing skills just tools that could serve any purpose? Could the same style that created Horton the elephant also create racist caricatures? If so, what did that say about art? What did that say about him? He didn't publish a children's book for 2 years after the war. In 1947, he finally released McElligot's Pool. Dr. Seuss had returned, but he was changed. The books nobody saw coming. Post-war Dr. Seuss books were different from pre-war books, more serious, more political, more concerned with social justice. Horton Hears a Who, 1954, was explicitly about protecting the vulnerable. A person's a person, no matter how small. An apology for failing to recognize Japanese humanity. The Sneetches, 1961, attacked racial prejudice. Star-bellied Sneetches discriminate against plain-bellied Sneetches. A con artist exploits their prejudice. Eventually, they can't tell each other apart and realize the distinctions were meaningless. The Lorax, 1971, tackled environmental destruction. Industry destroys nature for profit. Someone must speak for the trees. The Butter Battle Book, 1984, addressed nuclear proliferation. Two sides escalate weapons over trivial differences. Neither side wins. These weren't just children's books. They were political statements wrapped in Seussian whimsy. The same strategy he'd used in wartime propaganda, innocent style delivering serious messages. But now the messages promoted peace, justice, and empathy. The weapon had been repurposed. The legacy nobody controls Theodor Geisel died September 24, 1991. He was 87 years old. He'd published over 60 books that sold more than 600 million copies worldwide. Generations of children grew up with his stories. The Cat in the Hat, Green Eggs and Ham, How the Grinch Stole Christmas, One Fish, Two Fish, Red Fish, Blue Fish. These books taught reading, morality, environmental awareness, anti-racism. They shaped childhoods. They influenced values. They mattered. But his wartime propaganda remained largely forgotten. The PM cartoons weren't republished until 1999. Most Dr. Seuss fans had no idea they existed. When Richard Minier published Dr. Seuss Goes to War in 1999, the book shocked people. This was Dr. Seuss, the beloved children's author, drawing racist caricatures, creating government propaganda. The revelation forced a reckoning. How do we reconcile the two Geisels, the propagandist who dehumanized Japanese people, and the author who wrote, "A person's a person, no matter how small," the cartoonist who portrayed war as morally simple, and the author who wrote about the senselessness of the butter battle, the artist who used his innocent style as a weapon, and the writer who used that same style to promote peace. There's no easy answer. People contain contradictions. Artists evolve. Understanding changes. Geisel's transformation from propagandist to peace advocate demonstrates growth. But it doesn't erase the harm his wartime cartoons caused. The question nobody answers: what does Dr. Seuss's story teach us about art and propaganda? First, style is morally neutral. The same innocent drawings can serve radically different purposes. Whimsy can charm children or manipulate adults. Simplicity can educate or indoctrinate. Second, intent doesn't determine impact. Geisel believed he was fighting evil. He thought his Japanese caricatures served a good cause, but they contributed to internment regardless of his intentions. Third, artists have responsibility. Creating powerful images means those images will have effects beyond your control. Geisel couldn't control how his cartoons were used, but he was responsible for creating them. Fourth, growth is possible. Recognizing past errors doesn't erase them. But it allows learning. Geisel spent decades trying to atone for his wartime racism. Fifth, propaganda works. Geisel's cartoons mobilized millions of Americans. They sold war bonds. They encouraged scrap collection. They maintained morale. They also enabled internment. They dehumanized enemies. They oversimplified complex situations. The effectiveness of propaganda doesn't depend on whether its cause is just. The same techniques work for good and evil purposes. The warning nobody heeds. Today, Geisel's techniques are everywhere. Political cartoons still use caricature and simplification. Social media memes employ the same visual strategies. Advertising uses cute imagery to sell products. Propaganda still wraps serious messages in innocent packages. The style works. It bypasses critical thinking. It triggers emotion. It creates moral certainty. We see enemy nations depicted as monsters. We see political opponents portrayed as subhuman. We see complex policy debates reduced to simple images. The tools Geisel used haven't changed, just the targets and purposes. His story is a warning. Innocent style doesn't mean innocent purpose. Whimsical imagery can carry dangerous messages. Simple moral frameworks can justify complex evils. The question isn't whether propaganda exists. It does, always has, always will. The question is, how do we recognize it? How do we resist manipulation? How do we use persuasive art ethically? The art nobody controls. Here's what makes Geisel's case fascinating. His post-war children's books used the same techniques as his wartime propaganda. Simplified moral frameworks, clear good versus evil, emotional appeals, memorable imagery. The Snitches manipulates readers into opposing racism. The Lorax propagandizes for environmental protection. The Butter Battle book makes nuclear weapons seem absurd. Are these propaganda? Technically, yes. They're designed to change opinions and behaviors, but we call them children's literature instead of propaganda because we agree with the messages. This reveals an uncomfortable truth. We judge propaganda by whether we support its goals, not by its methods. Geisel's wartime cartoons attacking fascism seem justified. His cartoons dehumanizing Japanese people seem wrong. Both used identical techniques. The difference isn't the art. It's what we think about the cause. This is dangerous. If we only recognize propaganda we disagree with, we're vulnerable to propaganda we support. Geisel's greatest lesson might be this: be most skeptical of persuasive art you agree with. That's when manipulation is most effective. That's when critical thinking is hardest. That's when you're most likely to accept simplified morality uncritically. The legacy that never ends. Geisel's PM cartoons are now digitized, available online through UC San Diego's library. Anyone can view them, study them, learn from them. Some are brilliant political commentary, others are disturbing racist caricatures. Many are both simultaneously. This complexity is valuable. It prevents hagiography. It forces nuance. Dr. Seuss wasn't a saint. He was an artist who used his talent for both admirable and deplorable purposes. He grew, he changed, he tried to atone. But the wartime cartoons remain. They can't be erased. They shouldn't be erased. They're evidence of how easily intelligent, progressive people can participate in injustice. Geisel opposed racism against Jews and blacks, but he promoted racism against Japanese people. He saw some prejudice clearly. He was blind to other prejudice. This is human, uncomfortable, but human. The drawing that changed everything. So what about that innocent drawing, the one that became a weapon? It was never just one drawing. It was a style, an approach, a way of making serious ideas accessible through whimsy. Geisel developed this style selling Flit insecticide. He refined it in children's books. He weaponized it in wartime propaganda. He reclaimed it for peace advocacy. The style remained constant. The purposes changed. This is the uncomfortable truth about art. It serves whoever wields it. The most innocent-seeming images can carry the most dangerous messages. The most charming styles can sell the most harmful ideas. Geisel's Seussian creatures mobilized America for war. They also taught millions of children to read. They promoted racism. They fought prejudice. They oversimplified complex realities. They made difficult truths accessible. All from the same pen, all using the same techniques. The weapon was never the drawings themselves. It was always the ideas they carried. And those ideas, whether fighting fascism, enabling internment, or promoting peace, were chosen by the artist. Theodor Geisel chose. Sometimes he chose well. Sometimes he chose poorly. But he always chose. That's the legacy, not the drawings. The choices. And we must choose too. Every time we share a meme, every time we simplify a complex issue, every time we use humor to make a political point, every time we create or consume persuasive art, we're choosing, just like Geisel chose. The question is, will we choose better? Will we recognize when innocent style serves dangerous purposes? Will we resist manipulation even when we agree with the message? Will we maintain nuance even when simplicity is more compelling? Will we see people as fully human even when caricature is easier? Geisel's transformation from propagandist to peace advocate shows it's possible. Growth, change, atonement. But it requires recognizing that the innocent drawings we create today might look very different decades from now. The weapon of war might become a tool for peace. Or vice versa. The choice is ours. It's always been ours, and it always will be. The recognition that came too late. After the war, Geisel recognized his errors, slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely. He traveled to Japan in 1953. He met Japanese people as individuals, not as cartoon caricatures, not as wartime enemies, as people. This experience transformed him. In 1954, he published Horton Hears a Who. The dedication read, "For my great friend, Mitsugi Nakamura of Kyoto, Japan." The book's central message, a person's a person, no matter how small. This was atonement, recognition that he'd failed to see Japanese people as persons. The book is about protecting the vulnerable, believing what others deny, defending those without power. But it's also about recognizing humanity in those you previously dehumanized. Geisel had drawn Japanese people as less than human. Now he argued that even the smallest person deserves protection. Later books continued this redemption. The Sneetches, 1961, attacked all forms of prejudice. Star-bellied Sneetches aren't superior to plain-bellied Sneetches. The Lorax, 1971, gave voice to those who can't speak for themselves. The Butter Battle Book, 1984, showed the senselessness of arms races and military escalation. This was the opposite of his wartime propaganda. War isn't glorious. Enemies aren't monsters. Military escalation doesn't solve problems. Geisel had transformed from propagandist to peace advocate, from war supporter to war critic, from racist caricaturist to anti-racism author. But could atonement erase the harm? 120,000 Japanese Americans were interned, families destroyed, property confiscated, rights violated. Geisel's cartoons contributed to the climate that enabled this. Horton Hears a Who didn't unintern anyone. His transformation was real, and his later work promoted justice. But the earlier harm remained. The numbers that tell the story: over 400 editorial cartoons for PM magazine between 1941 and 1943. 26 cartoons per month for 2 years straight, each one designed to influence public opinion, change behavior, mobilize action. Private Snafu, dozens of animated episodes reaching millions of soldiers, training films seen by entire divisions, propaganda films influencing occupation policy. Post-war, over 60 children's books selling more than 600 million copies worldwide, multiple generations raised on his stories, values shaped by his messages. The scale is staggering. Few individuals have influenced so many people through visual media. Fewer still have done so for both war and peace. The impact compounds across decades. Children who read The Sneetches in 1961 raised children who read it in 1985. Those children raised children who read it in 2010. 3 generations learning anti-racism from an author who once drew racist propaganda. This paradox defines Geisel's legacy. The same pen, the same style, the same techniques, different purposes across time. The techniques that persist today. Geisel's propaganda methods didn't die in 1945. They evolved, adapted, spread. Modern political cartoons still use his techniques: personification of abstract concepts, exaggeration for emphasis, moral simplification, emotional targeting. Social media memes are direct descendants of Geisel's work. Simple images, clear messages, emotional impact, viral spread. They use the same psychological principles: bypass critical thinking, trigger emotion, create moral certainty, demand action. Political advertising employs Geisel's strategies. Campaign ads simplify complex policies into good versus evil narratives. They use visual metaphors instead of detailed analysis. They target fear, pride, anger, not reason. Even children's entertainment follows his model. Educational cartoons teach lessons through entertaining stories. They make learning fun by disguising instruction as play. They modify behavior through repeated exposure to simple messages. The difference? Intent and transparency. Educational cartoons admit they're teaching. Propaganda pretends it's just entertainment or information. But the line blurs constantly. Is an environmental cartoon teaching conservation or pushing political agenda? Is an anti-bullying story promoting kindness or social engineering? Is a patriotic film celebrating national identity or manufacturing consent? Geisel's work demonstrates that the same techniques serve multiple purposes. The tools are neutral. The ethics depend on use. The blind spots we all share, Geisel's story reveals uncomfortable truths about moral certainty. He was genuinely progressive for his era. He opposed racism against Jews and blacks, while most Americans tolerated it. He fought anti-Semitism when it was socially acceptable. He advocated for civil rights before the movement gained mainstream support. Yet he was blind to his own racism against Japanese people. He couldn't see what now seems obvious. His anti-Japanese cartoons were as racist as the anti-Semitic imagery he condemned. This wasn't hypocrisy. It was era-specific blindness. Cultural blind spots affect even those who fight other forms of prejudice. The lesson: we all have blind spots. The prejudices we fight don't make us immune to other prejudices. Progressive positions on some issues don't guarantee enlightenment on all issues. Today's activists might be blind to biases future generations will condemn. Today's moral certainties might be tomorrow's embarrassments. Today's propaganda for good causes uses tomorrow's harmful techniques. This doesn't mean abandoning activism. It means approaching advocacy with humility, recognizing that moral certainty can coexist with moral error. Geisel thought he was fighting pure evil in World War II. He was right about Hitler, but that righteousness enabled other wrongs. The children's books. Nobody questions, here's a disturbing thought, are Dr. Seuss's children's books propaganda? They use the same techniques as his wartime cartoons. Simplified moral frameworks, good characters versus bad characters. Emotional manipulation, make readers feel pride, shame, fear, joy. Clear behavioral messages. Don't discriminate, protect the environment, embrace diversity. Memorable imagery. Impossible creatures doing impossible things. The Lorax tells children capitalism destroys nature. That's a political message. The Sneetches tells children racial distinctions are meaningless. That's a political message. The Butter Battle book tells children arms races are absurd. That's a political message. But we call them children's literature instead of propaganda because we agree with the messages. This reveals propaganda's true definition: persuasive communication we disagree with. When we agree, it's education, advocacy, or art. Geisel understood this perfectly. He'd learned during the war that persuasive techniques work regardless of cause. The same methods that sold war bonds could sell peace. The same style that dehumanized enemies could promote universal human dignity. His children's books are propaganda for causes we, mostly, support: anti-racism, environmentalism, peace, kindness. But they're still propaganda. They still simplify complex issues. They still manipulate emotion. They still bypass critical thinking. The question isn't whether this is propaganda. It's whether propaganda for good causes is acceptable. The modern parallels. Nobody acknowledges Geisel's transformation from advertising artist to wartime propagandist to children's author mirrors modern creative careers. Today's illustrators create content for brands, then political causes, then entertainment. Today's animators work on commercials, then public service announcements, then films. Today's writers craft ad copy, then advocacy pieces, then novels. The skills transfer seamlessly because persuasion techniques are universal. Selling products teaches you to sell ideas. Selling ideas teaches you to sell values. Selling values teaches you to shape cultures. Social media influencers follow Geisel's path. They start creating entertainment content. They build audiences. Then they use those audiences to promote causes, products, political positions. The innocence of early content builds trust. That trust enables later persuasion. This is exactly what Geisel did. Build credibility with whimsical children's books, deploy that credibility for wartime propaganda, return to children's books with new messages. The pattern persists because it works. Audiences trust familiar voices. Innocent style disarms skepticism. Entertainment bypasses critical analysis. The responsibility nobody accepts. If Geisel's story teaches anything, it's that creators bear responsibility for their work's impact. I was just following orders didn't excuse Nazi war criminals. I was just doing my job doesn't excuse propagandists. I was just expressing myself doesn't excuse harmful art. Geisel created racist caricatures because the government asked him to. He was paid, he was praised, he was promoted, but he still created them. He could have refused, he could have pushed back, he could have modified his approach. He didn't, because he believed the cause justified the means, because he thought defeating Hitler excused racist propaganda, because wartime emergency suspended peacetime ethics. This logic enables atrocity. Good ends justifying bad means is how moral people commit immoral acts. Geisel later recognized this. His post-war work reflected that recognition. But recognition doesn't erase harm. Modern creators face the same choices. Will you create content you disagree with because you're paid? Will you simplify complex issues because simplification is more persuasive? Will you dehumanize opponents because your cause is just? Will you manipulate emotion because reason is less effective? These aren't hypothetical questions. Every content creator answers them constantly. Social media managers deciding how to frame issues, journalists choosing which facts to emphasize, filmmakers selecting which stories to tell, artists determining which messages to promote. Geisel's legacy asks, will you choose better than he did? The forgiveness. Nobody earned should we forgive Geisel for his racist wartime propaganda. He recognized his errors. He spent decades trying to atone. His later work promoted the values he'd violated earlier. He died respected, beloved, honored. But forgiveness isn't automatic. Recognition doesn't erase harm. Atonement doesn't undo injustice. The Japanese Americans who were interned, many are still alive. They lived through the consequences of propaganda like Geisel's. They lost homes, businesses, educations, years of their lives. Does Horton Hears a Who compensate for that? Forgiveness belongs to victims, not historians. We can note Geisel's growth. We can appreciate his later work. We can learn from his transformation. But we can't grant forgiveness that isn't ours to give. The legacy that never settles. What do we do with Geisel's complicated legacy? Some argue we should cancel Dr. Seuss. His racist propaganda disqualifies his children's books. Remove them from libraries. Stop teaching them in schools. Erase his cultural influence. Others argue we should separate the work from the creator. The children's books stand alone. Their messages are valuable regardless of his wartime propaganda. Millions of children have learned anti-racism from the snitches. Both positions miss the point. The value isn't in choosing one or the other. It's in holding both truths simultaneously. Geisel created harmful racist propaganda. Geisel created valuable anti-racist children's literature. Both statements are true. Neither cancels the other. This is uncomfortable. We prefer simple narratives, heroes or villains, good or bad. Complexity is harder. But complexity is accurate. People contain contradictions. Artists grow and change. Impact varies across time and context. The solution isn't cancellation or celebration. It's honest reckoning. Acknowledge all of Geisel's work. Teach both the propaganda and the children's books. Examine how the same techniques serve different purposes. Discuss what his transformation reveals about growth and accountability. Use his story to question our own certainties. Where are we blind? What will future generations condemn about our current work? How do we create persuasive content ethically? The drawing that never stops. Geisel died in 1991, but his drawings haven't stopped working. The Cat in the Hat still teaches millions of children to read. The Lorax still inspires environmental activism. The Snitches still challenges prejudice. Horton Hears a Who still defends the vulnerable. And his wartime propaganda still teaches different lessons about the power of images, about the dangers of moral certainty, about the persistence of prejudice even among progressives, about the need for constant self-examination. The innocent drawing style continues in children's books, political cartoons, social media memes. The techniques persist because they work. The weapons remain effective. The question is, who wields them and for what purposes? That was Geisel's question. It's our question too. Every time we create an image intended to persuade, every time we share a meme meant to influence, every time we use humor to make a political point, every time we simplify a complex issue to make it accessible, we're following Geisel's path, using innocent style for serious purposes, hoping our cause justifies our methods, believing our intentions excuse our impacts. Will we do better than he did? Or will future generations look back at our work with the same discomfort we feel examining his? The weapon is in our hands now. The choice is ours, just as it was always Geisel's. The innocent drawing awaits. What will we make it do?